The world above was on fire with words. Words of condemnation, of retaliation, of tragic error. In the cramped, dimly lit wardroom of the Swedish diesel submarine HMS Helsingør, those words crackled from a small radio, a tinny ghost of the storm raging in the United Nations and across front pages. Commander Anders Reed did not listen to the words. He listened to the silence between them. He traced the edge of a child's drawing, taped to the bulkhead, next to his station. A clumsy, cheerful submarine under a yellow sun signed, "Papa, come home soon. Love, Elin." The contrast was a physical ache. Out there, a Korean airliner lay scattered across the sea. Here, in the cold, tea-colored waters of the Baltic autumn, his duty was to be a ghost, a silent sentinel, for a neutral kingdom. The Helsingør was returning to Karlskrona, a dark, cigar-shaped shadow, sliding through the labyrinth of rocky islands and deep channels that were Sweden's coastal shield. The mood was subdued, the crew performing their duties with a quiet efficiency that couldn't quite mask the collective tension. The sea felt different now. It felt watched. In the sonar suite, Petty Officer Linnea Eklund existed in a universe of sound. Her eyes were closed, her fingers lightly drumming the beat of the deep. She knew the heartbeat of these waters, the rhythmic thump of a distant Finnish ferry, the seismic creak of ancient granite on the seabed, the scurrying clicks of herring shoals. It was a chaotic symphony she could read like a map. Then a new note. It was not loud. It was a stain, a whisper of something impossibly smooth and deep, a mechanical serpent sliding through the thermocline. She marked it, her pulse ticking up a notch. A minute later, another, fainter, different in texture, a lower guttural hum with a faint harmonic ring, like a blade being slowly whetted. Two ghosts, not one. And they were not Swedish. They were too quiet, too purposefully stealthy. They were the sounds of the world above, brought down into her deep. She called Reed. He stood behind her, his presence a calm pressure. She played the filtered audio. The first sound was the purr of a predator. The second, the breath of a different beast. Reed's face, usually an unreadable chart of discipline, tightened. A single, almost imperceptible tick in his jaw. He had served alongside NATO officers. He had studied Soviet acoustics profiles. He knew, with cold certainty, what he was likely hearing. An American Los Angeles class and a Soviet shchuka dancing a deadly waltz in his country's territorial waters. Position? His voice was a gravel whisper. Grid Echo 7, the Narrows past Gotland, 70 meters. A bottleneck. A perfect, treacherous ambush point. A place no sane captain would take a nuclear boat on a silent run, unless they were desperate, or unless they were hunting. Reed made a decision, not as a soldier following a protocol, but as a man who had just kissed his daughter's forehead 3 days ago. He had to see. He had to know. Helm, all stop. Drift us silent on the current. Sonar, passive arrays only. I want to become a rock. The Helsingør fell into a profound hush, a metal womb adrift in the dark. The only sound was the crew's breathing and the distant, haunting moan of the sea. Minutes stretched. The two ghost signatures on Eklund's screen circled each other with glacial, sinister slowness in the narrow channel. Then, the American ghost did something insane. A sharp, piercing ping. A single frantic burst of active sonar. In the world of silent service, it was a scream in a library. An act of pure, naked panic. Eklund flinched as the sound wave, meant for another, washed over their hull with a physical tremor. On the screen, the Soviet signature reacted instantly, violently. It lunged, an emergency blow to its ballast tanks to gain altitude, a terrified whale trying to surface. The two computerized blips on the screen, representing hundreds of lives and megatons of apocalyptic power, converged. The sound that followed was not an explosion. It was worse. It was the deep, visceral, grinding shriek of two leviathans making love in a tomb. A sound of tearing metal, collapsing pressure hulls, and screaming interior atmospheres. It was a sound that bypassed the ears and vibrated directly in the teeth and the marrow of the spine. On the Helsingør, every man and woman froze. A coffee mug shattered on the deck. The lights flickered. Eklund tore her headphones off, her face pale. The screens showed a chaotic mess of returns. Then, a new, dreadful sound filled the passive hydrophones. A low, steady, monstrous hiss, the sound of a high-pressure air bank rupturing into the sea. And through it, faint, distorted, but unmistakable, the rapid, metallic clang, clang, clang of a Soviet submarine's emergency distress signal. Reed stared at the sonar screen, now a Jackson Pollock of catastrophe. The child's drawing of the friendly submarine seemed to burn in his peripheral vision. The political abstractions of the Cold War were gone, vaporized, replaced by this immediate, deafening reality. Two nuclear-powered submarines were dying, tangled in a metallic embrace, on the bottom of a Swedish fjord. The air in the control room grew thick, metallic with the taste of shared dread. He saw not just blips, but compartments flooding. Men in the dark, in the freezing water pounding on sealed hatches. He saw the slow leak of reactor coolant, the shadow of a nuclear ghost joining the oil slicks. He saw his daughter's son being blotted out. His voice, when it finally came, was hollow, stripped of all rank, filled only with the weight of what he now carried. Signal headquarters. Maximum encryption. He paused, the words like stones he had to lift. Flash alert. Incident, Blue Bear. We have a mutual kill. I repeat, a mutual kill. In our waters. He looked at his horrified executive officer, a young man named Sandberg, whose wife was expecting their first child. And now, Reed said, his eyes returning to the cursed screen, to the dying pings of the Soviet distress signal, we wait for the world to end, or for them to find out we were here. The silence after the transmission was the loudest sound Anders Reed had ever heard. It was not an absence of noise, but a vacuum that sucked in all thought, all hope, leaving only the cold hum of the Helsingør systems and the phantom echo of tearing metal. On the sonar screen, the two distinct entities had merged into a single, grotesque scar of acoustic returns, a tangled grave of steel and secrets. Reed's order to hold position, to become just another rock on the seabed, felt like a death sentence. They were now silent witnesses to an ongoing catastrophe. Through the hydrophones, the symphony of destruction unfolded with horrifying clarity. The initial catastrophic hiss of escaping air faded, replaced by subtler, more terrible sounds. The groan of collapsing bulkheads under immense pressure, sharp, isolated clangs, tools, or bodies, striking interior hulls. And once, a clear, desperate series of Morse code taps from the Soviet boat. SOS, K5. The signal cut off mid-sequence, drowned by a new, liquid roar of inrushing water. Petty Officer Eklund transcribed the fragment automatically, her hands trembling. She did not look up. No one in the control room could meet another's eyes. The abstract tension of the Cold War had crystallized into this. They were listening to men drown. 23 minutes after the collision, the world above finally reacted. First, a new, aggressive, active sonar ping sliced through the water from the northeast. American, the Providence's sister, or a surface ship, searching frantically. It was followed minutes later by a different, lower-frequency sweep from the east. Soviet. The hunters had become searchers, their signals painting the dying hulks, and unavoidably brushing over the motionless Swedish submarine. "They've painted us, sir," the executive officer Sandberg whispered. His face was slick with a cold sweat. Reed merely nodded. It was inevitable. He watched the two new blips circle the site like sharks, aware of each other, aware of the third, unexpected presence. A standoff in a graveyard. His mind raced through the calculus. To surface was to declare himself a party. To stay was to risk being accused of culpability. To move was to trigger a response. In Washington, D.C., the Situation Room was a tableau of controlled panic. The National Security Advisor, a shrewd woman named Charlotte Vance with eyes like chip ice, stared at the satellite-derived report. A subsurface thermal anomaly in the Baltic. The loss of contact with USS Providence. An intercept of a Swedish military flash alert containing the words, "mutual kill." A mutual kill on the seabed, in Swedish waters, days after we nearly went to war over a dead airliner, she stated, her voice devoid of emotion. Options. A Navy admiral, his face ashen, spoke. The Providence was on a sensitive intelligence-gathering patrol. If she's compromised, and if the Soviets can board, and if they can prove she was in territorial waters, we've handed the entire Scandinavian bloc to Moscow on a silver platter, Vance finished. She made a decision. We deny. We blame a submerged geological survey accident, a gas vent. We signal our search vessel, secure the site, deter Soviet approach, and if the Swedish boat has seen anything, they are to be persuaded of our version. Quietly. In Moscow, a similar darker calculus was taking place in a smoke-filled room. A general of the KGB's first directorate slammed a fist on the table. The Shchuka was tailing the American. This is provocation. An attack. An older, colder admiral from the Northern Fleet shook his head. Our boat was also where it should not have been. The Politburo does not want a war over a botched shadowing mission. Not now. The American coward Reagan will blink first. We deny. We blame a catastrophic mechanical failure. And we send our own ship to recover our secrets and to ensure the Swedes understand the benefits of amnesia. Back in the Baltic, the first debris reached the surface. Reed, at the periscope under a blanket of twilight drizzle, saw it. A slick of diesel oil, iridescent and poisonous. Then smaller pieces, insulation, a shattered wooden crate, and then a body. A man in a Soviet naval flight jacket, his face pale and waxy in the gray light. He was followed by another, this one in the unmistakable coveralls of an American submariner. They floated silently, enemies reconciled in death, a mere kilometer from the rocky Swedish shore. On the Helsingør's radio, the channels erupted. First, in crisp English. All vessels, this is United States Navy vessel USNS Assertive. We are conducting emergency survey operations following a suspected undersea seismic event. We advise all non-participating vessels to clear the area for safety. Seconds later, in heavily accented English, a Soviet voice overlaid it. This is Soviet research vessel Academic Berg. We are investigating loss of oceanographic platform. This is restricted zone. You will stand off. The lies were so brazen, so instantly fabricated, that Reed felt a surge of nausea. They were erasing the dead men outside his viewfinder. They were turning a tragedy of arrogance and fear into a geological footnote. Sandberg approached him, holding a printed signal from Swedish Naval Command. Reed read it. The words were careful, bureaucratic, and heavy with fear. Maintain observation. Do not, repeat, do not intervene or communicate. Await diplomatic resolution. Highest national security priority. He crumpled the paper in his fist. A diplomatic resolution meant his country was already bargaining with the wolves over the carcass. His role was to be the blind eye. Then, Eklund spoke from her station, her voice a raw thread. Sir, I'm getting a new signal. From the wreck. Very faint. It's a hand pump. A manual bilge pump. On the American side of the wreck. Reed froze. A hand pump meant a sealed compartment. A sealed compartment meant air. Air meant survivors. The calculus shattered. He was no longer just a witness to a crime scene. He was a bystander, listening to the last, fading heartbeat of trapped men. The political orders, the brazen lies from the superpowers, the cautious fear from his own command. They all disintegrated against that simple, rhythmic, mechanical squeak-thud, coming through the hydrophones. He looked at Sandberg, at Eklund, at the faces of his crew. They had all heard it. They were all now complicit in a new terrible choice. Follow orders, and let the last survivors of the Providence and the K-524I suffocate in the dark as their governments negotiated a lie. Or do something. Reed's gaze shifted to his daughter's drawing, the cheerful yellow sun. He thought of the Soviet sailor's family, the American technician's parents, waiting for news that would never come with the truth. The weight in the room was no longer just dread. It was the crushing burden of moral agency. "Helm," Reed said, his voice now strangely calm, a decision having crystallized in the depths of his anger and shame. "Prepare to move us in. Slowly. On my mark." He was no longer just a commander. He was a man who had just decided to step into the crossfire. The Helsingør was a ghost no longer. Its slow, cautious approach towards the death-stitched wrecks was an act of profound, visible defiance. Every meter forward was a meter into a crossfire of lies and desperation. On the surface, the American survey ship, USNS Assertive, and the Soviet research vessel, Academic Berg, circled each other like rival predators over a fresh kill, their messages now thinly veiled threats broadcast on open channels. Below, the water was alive with the aggressive searching pings of their sonars, painting the Swedish submarine as an unwelcome intruder. Anders Reed ignored them. His entire world had narrowed to the faint, rhythmic squeak-thud from the hydrophones. A human heartbeat in a tomb of steel. Petty Officer Eklund had isolated it to a specific quadrant of the tangled wreckage, the forward compartment of the American Providence. "Pressure is stabilizing, but dropping slowly," she reported, her voice clinical, a dam against the horror. "The pump rate is slowing. They're tiring, or running out of air." In the control room, the crew moved with a new, grim purpose. The abstract dread had been burned away by the tangible urgency of the pump. They were no longer just observers. They were being drafted into a rescue mission no one wanted. Reed made two decisions. The first was operational. "Prepare the DSRV, 2 volunteers." The deep submergence rescue vehicle was a small diving bell-like pod, designed for this exact nightmare scenario, in theory. It had never been used in hostile waters under the guns of 2 superpowers. The second decision was moral, and it sent a visible shock through his executive officer, Sandberg. "Open a secure channel, narrow beam, to the Soviet vessel." "Sir, do it." When the link crackled to life, Reed spoke in clear, textbook Russian, learned during long, cold nights at Naval Intelligence School. "Soviet vessel Academic Berg. This is Swedish submarine Helsingør. I am transmitting on a survivorship frequency from the wreck of your submarine K524I. Do you copy?" The silence on the other end was absolute, heavier than any static. Finally, a voice, tight with controlled fury, responded. "Swedish vessel, you are in violation. Cease interference." "I am listening to a manual bilge pump from the American wreck," Reed continued, his voice devoid of inflection, a simple carrier of terrible truth. "Your sonar can confirm its acoustic signature. There are men alive down there, American men. Their compartment will fail within hours. Your men are already silent." He let the words hang in the salt-charged electronic void. He was not appealing to their humanity. He was presenting them with a catastrophic variable: living American witnesses, survivors who could talk, who could confirm the presence of a Soviet submarine in Swedish waters. On the Academic Berg, the political officer argued for immediate jamming. The ship's captain, a veteran of the Northern Fleet who had lost friends to the crushing deep, saw the trap and the opportunity. He relayed the information to Moscow. In Washington, the news that survivors might exist triggered a different kind of panic. Charlotte Vance saw the entire delicate architecture of the cover-up, the seismic event, the quiet diplomacy, threatened by a handful of drowning sailors. If they surface and talk, we lose the narrative. If the Soviets get to them first, we lose everything. Our priority shifts. The site must be secured, at all costs. The unspoken order hovered, even if securing it means no one leaves it. Reed received his own new orders from Swedish Naval Command. They were no longer cautious. They were frantic. "Break off immediately. Return to Karlskrona. Your actions are compromising national security. This is a direct order." He read the message on the screen, then looked at Sandberg, who had seen it too. Sandberg's face was a mask of conflicted duty. "Commander, they're ordering us to leave men to die." "I am aware of the content of the signal, Executive Officer," Reed said, his voice quiet. He turned to the DSRV launch station. Two of his crew, a pilot and a systems operator, were already sealing themselves in. They met his gaze through the small viewport and nodded. They had volunteered, knowing they might not be retrieved. Reed turned back to Sandberg. "You have the order in hand. Your duty is to the ship and to the chain of command. If you wish to relieve me, now is the time. I will enter the DSRV." Sandberg looked from the printed order to the determined faces of the rescue volunteers, to the sonar screen where the faint pump signal was now growing irregular. He saw his unborn child's face, and then he saw the floating body of the American sailor from Reed's periscope footage. He slowly tore the order in half. "The signal was garbled, sir. We never received a clear transmission." A faint, hard smile touched Reed's lips. It vanished instantly. "Launch the DSRV." The small pod detached from the Helsingør and began its agonizingly slow descent into the deeper dark, towards the snarl of broken metal. On the surface, the circling ships detected the launch. A new, more frantic series of communications erupted. The assertive announced it was launching its own submersible for survey purposes. The academic berg warned of unstable geological formations. Inside the DSRV, the Swedish rescue crew guided their craft through a surreal landscape. The external lights cut through the murk to reveal a nightmare sculpture. The sleek, black sail of the Los Angeles-class boat was speared through the older, beefier hull of the Stuka. Wires and cables trailed like severed tendons. A massive tear in the Soviet hull gaped, a dark mouth from which no light escaped. They maneuvered towards the American forward compartment. Through a shattered viewport, they saw a scene from hell. Flickering emergency lights illuminated a space partially flooded with icy water. 4 figures, pale, shivering, their faces etched with exhaustion and terror, were taking turns on a hand pump. A 5th man lay on a cot, not moving. When the DSRV's light hit them, they froze, staring like miners seeing the sun after an eternity. The Swedish pilot established a hard seal against the Providence's escape hatch. The process was delicate, slow. Every second was amplified by the knowledge that the giants above were descending. The Assertive's submersible, a sleek, armed remote vehicle, appeared at the edge of the light, its camera lens staring like a cyclops's eye. Then, from the Soviet wreck, a final act of defiance. A single suited figure, a K-524 crewman, who had survived in an isolated air pocket, swam into the light. He was injured, one arm hanging useless. He carried a small, watertight case. He ignored the American submersible, ignored the DSRV. With his last strength, he swam to a jagged edge of his own boat's hull and used a magnetic clamp to attach the case to the outer steel. A final act of duty, securing the secrets. He turned, looked directly into the DSRV's viewport, gave a slow, solemn nod, and then let the current take him, drifting away into the endless dark. The message was clear. You may save them. You will not have our soul. The DSRV hatch clanged open. The first American survivor, a young petty officer, stumbled into the Swedish pod, weeping uncontrollably. He grabbed the pilot's arm, his voice a raw, salt-corroded croak. The Russian boat, it came out of nowhere. We pinged. We were scared. God, we were so scared. Back in the Helsingør's control room, Reed listened to the live audio feed. He heard the confession in the man's voice. The cause. Not malice, but blind, mutual fear in a narrow channel. The exact truth that both superpowers were desperate to bury. He now held something more dangerous than evidence. He held living witnesses. And he had just committed an act of war against the carefully constructed lies of the most powerful nations on Earth. The DSRV began its ascent, carrying its fragile cargo of truth and salvation. Above, the wolves closed in, their intentions no longer veiled by diplomacy. Reed had the truth. Now he had to survive it. The ascent of the DSRV was a slow-motion race against collapsing geopolitics. Inside the cramped rescue pod, the atmosphere was a thick mix of triumph and terror. 4 living American sailors, wrapped in emergency blankets, shivered violently, their eyes wide with the shock of deliverance and the haunting memory of the dark. The 5th man, an older chief petty officer, had not survived the final hour. His body remained in the tomb of the Providence, a piece of the truth that would never surface. The young petty officer who had spoken, his name tag read D. Miller, kept babbling. A floodgate opened by trauma. It was just a routine creep. Then the Russian was there, right on top of us. Our CO panicked. He ordered the active ping, just one, to see. And then they just came up, like a damned whale. We couldn't turn. There was no time. His voice dissolved into quiet sobs. Every word was a diamond of actionable intelligence, a direct contradiction to the official stories being woven in Washington and Moscow. Aboard the Helsingør, Anders Reed absorbed the audio feed. He now possessed the catalyst, the single panicked American active sonar ping that triggered the Soviet evasive maneuver. The spark. This wasn't an act of war. It was an accident born from fear, the human flaw in the perfect, silent machine of deterrence. This truth was, in its own way, more dangerous than any weapon. It made the catastrophe mundane, stripping both superpowers of their righteous anger and exposing the reckless fragility of their game. On the surface, the reactions were swift and thermonuclear. The American USNS Assertive, receiving confirmed data that survivors were being extracted by the Swedes, ceased all pretense. Its captain's voice, now stripped of diplomatic veneer, crackled over the military frequency reserved for NATO allies. Helsingør, this is assertive. You are in possession of United States personnel and material. You will transfer them to our custody immediately upon surfacing. Failure to comply will be considered an act of gross interference and hostile action. Simultaneously, the Soviet academic berg made its move. It launched a second, larger submersible, this one clearly equipped with manipulator arms and cutting tools. Its target was not the survivors, but the wreck itself, and the black case magnetically clamped to the hull of the K-524I. Their mission had shifted from salvage to scorched earth. Deny the enemy everything. Reed was trapped in a vertical pincer. Above, an ally demanding surrender. Below, an adversary moving to destroy evidence. His own government's last transmission was a screaming all-caps order to disengage and return. He looked at the faces of his crew. Sandberg, his XO, stood paralyzed, awaiting an impossible command. Eklund's eyes were fixed on her screen, tracking the Soviet submersible's descent towards the case. The entire control room held its breath. Reed made his choice. It was not the choice of a Swedish naval officer. It was the choice of a man who had seen a Soviet sailor give him a final, dignified nod before surrendering to the abyss. Eklund, narrow beam transmission to the Soviet submersible on their engineering frequency. Sir, they will not answer. They will listen. Send this, in Russian text and on the acoustic channel. The case from the K-524 is under Swedish sovereign protection. Attempt to retrieve or destroy it will be met with force. The survivors from the Providence are in our custody. Their testimony is sealed. You have 1 hour to withdraw your surface vessel from our territorial waters. A gamble of monstrous proportions. He was bluffing with a pair of deuces. The Helsingør had no weapons that could threaten the surface ship, and its only defense against the submersible was its own fragile hull. Then to Sandberg. Surface, exactly halfway between the Assertive and the academic berg. Bring us up slow. Deck crew to receive the DSRV. Armed guards on the sail. No one boards us. As the Helsingør began its rise, breaking the oil-slicked surface into the grim Baltic twilight, it became the smallest, most vulnerable piece on the board. It was now a visible target. The Assertive turned its flank towards them, a clear intimidation. The academic berg held its position, but its submersible paused its descent, hovering near the wreck. The DSRV broke the surface and was hauled onto the wet, rolling deck. The hatch opened. The sight of the pale, rescued American sailors, helped out by Swedish crewmen, was transmitted via telescope and radar to both larger ships. It was a visual fact that could not be undone. In Washington, Charlotte Vance received the update. The Swedes have them, and they're broadcasting defiance to the Soviets. She closed her eyes. The game was over. The cover-up was impossible now. The only move left was damage control. Get me the Swedish ambassador and open the hotline to Moscow. Tell them we need to talk about a mutual understanding regarding a tragic dual-system failure in international waters. In Moscow, the message from the tiny Swedish submarine changed the calculus. The Swedes were not folding. They had the evidence, they had the witnesses, and they were willing to play a suicidal hand of chicken. The general who wanted war was overruled. The cost of silencing the Swedes now was too high, the optics disastrous. The order was sent to the academic Berg. Stand down. Retrieve our submersible. The case is lost. On the deck of the Helsingør, in the stinging drizzle, Reed stood facing the two leviathans. Miller, the rescued sailor, stumbled towards him, supported by a medic. "Thank you," Miller choked out. Reed looked at him, then past him, at the Soviet ship. "What you said down there, about the ping, about the fear, you will be asked to say otherwise. For the rest of your life, you will be pressured to forget what you said to me." Miller's eyes, hollow with exhaustion, found a sliver of defiance. "I know what I saw, sir." "Then remember it," Reed said softly. "Your memory is all that's left of them." He turned to see the Soviet submersible break the surface a kilometer away, empty-handed, and begin its recovery. The academic Berg slowly turned its bow, moving off. The assertive, after a long, tense silence, signaled a terse message. "Escort will be provided for your return to Karlskrona." It was not a thank you. It was a custody detail. Back in the control room, the relief was palpable, but brittle. They had won a battle against giants by forcing a stalemate. But Reed knew the truth. The Helsingør was no longer a submarine. It was a crime scene, a diplomatic bomb, and a coffin for secrets. They were not going home as heroes. They were returning as the most inconvenient men and women in the world. He walked to his station. His daughter's drawing was still there, the yellow sun now a cruel joke. He had saved lives. He had preserved a fragment of truth, and in doing so he had likely ended his career, and possibly signed a death warrant for the quiet, normal life he had promised his family. The weight of the light he had brought to the surface was heavier. Then, the return to Karlskrona was not a homecoming. It was an armed procession. The USS Assertive sailed a precise, intimidating half-mile off their port bow, a reminder of custody, not protection. On the horizon, a Soviet intelligence-gathering vessel maintained a watchful, sullen distance. The Helsingør, battered and morally exhausted, sailed between them, a prize of war that had captured the wrong kind of treasure. Below decks, the atmosphere was a funeral dirge disguised as routine. The 4 rescued American sailors were sequestered in the officers' wardroom under a polite but firm guard. Their initial relief had hardened into a shell-shocked silence. They understood now. They were not saved. They were evidence. Petty Officer Miller stared at the bulkhead, replaying the moment his captain gave the panicked order. He knew that memory was no longer his own. It belonged to admirals and politicians now. Anders Reed stood in the control room for the final approach. He had not slept. His eyes were fixed on the growing silhouette of the naval base, but he did not see welcoming lights. He saw a gilded cage. Sandberg approached, holding a new, sealed orders packet delivered by flashing light from the Assertive. "For you, sir, from our own high command, to be opened upon docking. Reed took the packet. It felt heavy, final. He didn't open it. He already knew its essence. Silence, obedience, complicity. The docking was a sterile, choreographed spectacle. No cheering families, no lines of crew. The pier was cleared, secured by a cordon of military police in dress uniforms that looked like costumes of authority. Waiting on the rain-slicked quay were 3 distinct groups, separated by empty space. To the right, a tall American naval captain in an immaculate bridge coat, flanked by a civilian in a dark overcoat, Charlotte Vance's envoy. To the left, a Soviet naval attaché and a man with the unmistakable stone-faced demeanor of the KGB. In the center, the Swedish Chief of Naval Staff, Admiral Lundgren, a man Reed had once respected. His face was a mask of granite disappointment. As the gangway was secured, the performance began. The American captain stepped forward, all crisp salutes and procedural clarity. On behalf of the United States government, we extend our profound gratitude for your courageous rescue of our personnel. We will now assume custody for debriefing and medical care. It was a claim, not a request. 2 Swedish MPs escorted the 4 American sailors off the boat. As Miller passed Reed, he stopped. He looked at Reed, a torrent of words fighting behind his eyes. Apology, thanks, fear. The American civilian agent took his arm firmly. "This way, sailor. You're safe now." Miller was led away without another word, swallowed by the official narrative. Then, the Soviet attaché stepped forward. He offered no thanks. His voice was a low, diplomatic growl. "Commander, a sensitive piece of Soviet maritime equipment was lost in this tragic incident. Our analysis suggests it may have entered Swedish jurisdiction. Its recovery would be a significant gesture of goodwill. They were asking for the black case, the soul of the K-524I. Reed looked at Admiral Lundgren. His superior gave an almost imperceptible nod. "Comply." Reed turned and gestured to Sandberg. A crewman brought a sealed, watertight container from the secure locker. Reed took it. He felt its weight, the weight of the dead Soviet sailor's last duty. He walked to the Soviet attaché and handed it over without a word. The KGB man took it, his fingers tightening on the handle like a vice. A state secret for a state secret. A balance of silence. Finally, the crowds of spies and allies retreated, leaving Reed alone on the pier with Admiral Lundgren. The rain intensified, soaking through their uniforms. "You saved lives, Anders," Lundgren said, his voice devoid of warmth. "And in doing so, you nearly started a war. You disobeyed direct, repeated orders. You forced our hand on the world stage." "There were men dying, sir. Men who were where they should not have been," Lundgren snapped, the facade cracking. "Do you think the truth matters? The truth is a luxury for small nations surrounded by giants. Our duty is survival, not truth. You traded our safety for your conscience." He handed Reed the now opened orders packet. The contents were simple: a promotion to full captain, and an immediate, voluntary reassignment to a desk in the remote logistics directorate, far from the sea, far from command, far from any secrets. A gilded cage, exactly as Reed had foreseen. His career was not ended. It was neutered and archived. "The incident is closed," Lundgren stated, the finality absolute. "It was a tragic accident in international waters, exacerbated by severe weather and navigational error. The Swedish Navy performed its humanitarian duty with distinction. That is the story. The only story. You will learn it. You will believe it. Your crew will be dispersed to new posts. The Helsingør will undergo a long refit. Reed stood on the empty pier long after Lundgren left. The rain mixed with the salt on his face. He looked at his submarine, now being swarmed by technicians who were not there to repair, but to sanitize, to scrub every hydrophone log, every sonar tape, every memory of the squeak thud and the dying Morse code. He walked to his car, an ordinary sedan in a gray parking lot. Inside on the passenger seat was his daughter's drawing, retrieved by a loyal junior officer. The cheerful yellow submarine under a smiling sun. He traced the waxy crayon lines. He had won. He had pulled men from the dark. He had forced the giants to a draw. He had brought a fragment of truth to the light. And as he drove away from the sea, into the gray anonymity of his new life, he understood the final, crushing victory of the system. The truth had not set anyone free. It had been captured, dismantled, and buried in a deeper, more secure vault than any ocean trench. It lived only in the haunted eyes of 4 American sailors, in the sealed archives of 2 superpowers, and in the silent, private ruin of his own heart. The quietest truth, he realized, is not the one that is shouted down. It is the one that is dutifully, peacefully forgotten. He turned the wheel, heading inland, away from the water, carrying the weight of the deepest, darkest silence of all.